movies, whereas last time I shared 5 favorites. I only have 3 for you this time, and these movies aren't really horror in the strictest sense. Well, my first choice is, but these are nightmarish either way. I'm gonna be mentioning inappropriate topics, so this video and all my other videos really are for adults 21 and over. If you are an adult, I expect respect. Okay, let's get into it. The first movie is Piercing from 2018. It was directed by Nicolas Pesce, and it's a psychological thriller with hints of black comedy. This one's based on a novel by Ryu Murakami, who wrote Audition, and it stars Christopher Abbott and Mia Wasikowska. Abbott plays a sociopath named Reed who struggles with intrusive, violent urges. They've become so overwhelming that he can't control them anymore, and he decides he needs to kill someone. So he uses a fake business trip as a cover for his plans. When he's at his hotel, he calls an escort service, and that's how he meets Jackie. Because he's had these urges for so long, he meticulously plans for the moment, but he's not prepared because she's not a defenseless target. She has other plans in mind. This one was pretty good. I'd watch it again, but it's my least favorite of the 3. I was a little disappointed with the lack of context because there's a lot that should have been fleshed out. More insight on these characters' pasts was needed for it to leave a bigger impression on me. Things about Reed were revealed, but not explained well enough, and we don't get to learn about Jackie. I liked Wasikowska's chemistry with Abbott, and their performances were convincing. He's also really nice to look at, like so much in this movie. Jackie's apartment was so beautiful, and lots of strange things happen in there. I appreciated the nod to giallo films. I love how certain shots are framed. It feels voyeuristic at times, and that pairs well with the BDSM aesthetics. The outfits are great too. I went through this weird phase in my mid-20s where I watched a lot of gialli. So, if you're a fan of those, check this one out. You'll recognize the tracks by Goblin. Unfortunately, I feel like they wasted an opportunity to use good music. I didn't like hearing the Tenebrae theme at the end when these are 2 completely different stories. I've read reviews that have called it lazy, and I have to agree. I also wasn't a fan of the CGI buildings at first. They looked a bit goofy to me, but it ended up working well because it adds a dreamlike quality. Speaking of which, there's a sequence toward the end when Reed has a bad trip and he has disturbing hallucinations. I'd say that's the peak of this film, but it happens toward the end, so that's a shame. Essentially, this is the story of a woman with PPD who meets a man with sociopathy, and then twisted shit happens. I've seen short moments of black comedy are good too, but if physical violence disturbs you too much, just skip it. The next movie is The Wolf House, or La Casa Lobo. This one's a stop-motion animation film from Chile, directed by Joaquin Cosiña and Cristobal León. It was released in 2018. It was inspired by the atrocities committed in Colonia Dignidad, an isolated community that was established by German immigrants in Chile. It was founded in 1961 by Paul Schaefer, a welfare worker and preacher with Nazi ties who'd fled Germany because he'd been accused of violating children. He followed the teachings of an American preacher named William Branham, who foresaw the imminent destruction of Western democracies, so he was granted asylum and tax exemption from the Chilean government in exchange for political intelligence. During Pinochet's dictatorship in the 70s, there was a detention camp in the colony where people were tortured. It's said that Schaefer took part in the torture, which is highly likely because of the type of scumbag he was. It's also known that former Gestapo and SS members taught Chile's regime different torture tactics. Colonia Dignidad, which means colony of dignity, was essentially a cult of communal agricultural workers who were isolated from everyone else. They lived under a tyrannical, outdated code, and sadly, there were 100 children in the commune. Many were abused by Schaefer and other adults. So, the movie takes place in a fictitious commune known simply as La Colonia, the colony. It's meant to be a fairy tale produced by the leader of the cult for indoctrination purposes. It tells the story of Maria, a young girl who escapes the colony in fear of punishment for her idleness. She finds an abandoned house in the woods, and in it there are 2 little pigs. It draws a bit on the Little Red Riding Hood fairy tale because the 3 of them stay hidden from a wolf that terrorizes them from outside. This house is a magical place where things transform based on Maria's emotions and thoughts. The pigs morph into 2 little children who she names Ana and Pedro. She nurtures and protects them like if they were hers. The 3 of them start running out of food, and this poses a huge problem because the wolf is still out there watching them. Ana and Pedro start behaving oddly with Maria, and the 3 of them are stuck with each other, desperate to survive. I'd say that this is the most inaccessible of the 3 movies because it doesn't tell a typical story. It's very experimental and it gets confusing at times, but this is a dream world in a fairy tale, so it's meant to be that way. I was so impressed with this because I'm not an artistically gifted person. Creativity isn't something that comes naturally to me, so when I watch things like this, they stay with me for a long time. Some people are so damn talented. It's crazy to me how this movie is presented in a single shot. There's constant transformation and movement, but it happens in an uncanny way, even when what's shown is beautiful. When things transform, they emerge so violently and repulsively. For example, scenes blend into one another by having characters melt or come apart, and then they'll turn into the walls or furniture. That's something I can't remember seeing in another movie. It was very immersive for me. The single shot amplified the anxiety for me I got myself a little too tense a couple of times. Like, I noticed that my shoulders were raised, and then I'd laugh like an idiot because this is just a movie. But there I was, feeling unnerved by little clay figures speaking Spanish with thick German accents. Granted, I'd had too much coffee that day, but I knew a little bit about the history of Colonia Dignidad, so it struck a chord. Yes, these are little clay figures. Yes, this is just a movie, but awful things happen to real people, and I'm a lot more sensitive to things like this. Maybe it's because I'm getting old, I don't know. Either way, there's way too much dark shit in this world, and I watched this with the children in mind, so it freaked me the fuck out. And I don't know, Maria's whispering gave me ASMR, which I wasn't expecting from a horror movie. It was just very unsettling. Despite the ambiguity, it's worth a watch. If there was a conventional narrative to this, it would be my #1 recommendation. Very beautiful and haunting. The final film I have is called Hagazussa, a Heathen's Curse. Hagazussa means witch in medieval German. I found out about this movie last year through a comment from a subscriber. If you're watching this, thank you, Jason. This was incredible. This one's a folk horror tale from Austria, directed by Lucas Weigelfeld. It was released in 2017. It's set in the 15th century and centers on a goat herder named Albrun. The movie is split into 4 acts. In the first one, we see a turning point in Albrun's childhood, and it sets the tone for basically the rest of her life. Albrun is a lonely, tormented young woman whose unhealed trauma will send her on a downward spiral into self-destruction. I'm afraid that's all I can say about the plot, and that's mainly because this is slow cinema. There's hardly any dialogue, so if that's not your thing, you might not like this, but I would encourage you to give it a chance. I wasn't bored because the atmosphere was perfect for me. I was always wondering what was gonna happen next, because there's a shot of mystery to this story, and I didn't expect such a powerful first sequence. I definitely didn't expect the twist at the end. The few times there's music or dialogue, it feels oppressive. The score sounds like sludge metal, and the other people in the mountains are repelled by her, so there's a pervasive feeling of unease. Albrun is a pagan in a Christian world and a single mother to make matters worse. A Heathen's Curse is an apt title, cause this is a movie about someone who simply didn't have a chance. She was cursed from birth. This shows us what can happen to people with mental illness when they're shunned by society and pushed to their limits. This is one of the bleakest movies I've watched in a while. I felt sick twice and highly uncomfortable the whole time. There are 2 strong scenes of sexual violence and a very alarming scene that involves a goat. Yikes. One of the assaults happens to her as a child, and it freaked me the fuck out. So I'm warning you guys. The despondency that dominated this story was mitigated by the stunning landscape and her little baby at times, but it wasn't enough for this fucking assault on my emotions. I alluded to this in my last video, but I grew up with certain beliefs and experiences. So I'm a little heathen weirdo, according to Christians, so naturally I'm drawn to movies like this. German it's one of my top 3 favorite languages. I recommend this one to fans of atmospheric black metal or dark ambient music. Nightmarish. That's what this movie is, and it's why I recommend it for Halloween in spite of how crushing it is. If none of these movies appeals to you, I hope I at least relaxed you. I know I'm not the best at ASMR, but I try. I don't like speaking too slowly because it feels creepy and weird. I don't do that kind of ASMR. You can go somewhere else. Feel free to check out the video I made last year and check the description below for trailers. I usually leave trailers in the descriptions of my videos in case you haven't noticed. I'm gonna try not to go so long without posting, but I have other priorities and I don't get paid for this, so I can't make any promises, but I'll make sure I do a few of these countdowns for my next few videos to compensate for the long absence. Feel free to follow me on Letterboxd or Spotify. I follow back if you have similar taste in music or movies. For the person who asked if I have Instagram, YouTube hid your comment so I can't respond directly. I don't. If you've made it this far, thank you. Feel free to leave recommendations for me and any viewers in the comments. Have a safe and fun Halloween. Bye.